Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the clips of the live stream that happened this weekend. The link to the full-length stream will be in the description, as well as the link to the original story. I have clipped these sections together to make the best time possible for the videos, between 10 and 15 minutes. So, if there is more than one story in this video, they may not have sequentially happened in the stream. But, anyways, hope to see you guys in the next stream. If not, don't worry, there'll be more clips next week. There are also ways to support the channel down below if you so choose to do so. And if you could do all the YouTube gum for this video to help it in the algorithm, it would be very much appreciated. Anyways, on to the live sci-fi. Please note that the only editing I've done to these clips has been to clip them and boost the audio for better listening. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. This is a spelling mistake, so it is The Spearman, written by Alt Sci-Fi. Let's drop the music down a bit, just so it's a whisper. Just a hint of music. Hopefully it doesn't play mocking music at me again. I've heard he's 50 feet tall and breathes fire, Kekt, the old shriveled goblin, said as he perched on the edge of the counter in Mark's shop. The air hung thick with the dust, as was so common at the end of summer. The crops would not be ready for the harvest for at least another moon, maybe two. There was nothing to do but wait for the heat and thick cloying air. The boredom gave way to gossip wings, and the old goblins of the Tekyle village sat and talked. "Bah!" Varric said. "That's not true. He only human. He can't be more than 6 or 7 feet at the most. Nay, I tell you, 'tis not his size nor any flaming breath. It's his gaze. His baleful gaze burns the souls out of any living things he casts it upon. That be a true danger." "His gaze?" HFY asked. "You'd think he kills anything he looks at. How does he relax at home, knowing to even glance at his children would end their lives? Nay, I say, his arm be where his strength lie, a mighty blow that can fell 1,000 men at once. It seems to me," old Cheplix, the wise man of the village, said, "that stories oft become better in the telling. Mayhaps we should wait for the spearmen to arrive before repeating half-heard tales from travelers looking for free bed or young adventurers extorting their abilities. None of us have seen this man." "It wouldn't be long now," Chepex, the youngest, said as he entered from the dusty thoroughfare. "Good afternoon, grandfather," he said, bowing to his namesake. "There is a horse and a rider approaching. Appears to be human." "How tall is he?" Kekt asked. "Normal height, I suppose," Chepex, the youngest, said. "For a human, that is." "Did he catch you in his baleful gaze?" Varrock answered. "I don't... maybe? He's still some distance off from the village." "Did his arms look like tree trunks?" HFY asked. "They seem to be about the right proportions," Chepex, the youngest, said. "I haven't seen many humans before, though." "Standing here pestering my grandson will bring you no answers," old Chepex said. "Why don't we move to the porch and see for ourselves?" The old goblin stood up with much groaning and grunting and grumbling. There were complaints of knees, hips, hearts, lungs, and even one about an overworked spleen. HFY has never known what a spleen was or what it did, but it was one piece of knowledge beyond the rudimentary understanding of his fellows, so he mentioned his spleen as often as possible. The group finally managed to bring themselves to the porch. Across the dust-choked plain, a tall figure of a man atop a horse meandered. Time slowed to a crawl in the late afternoon heat. Sounds seemed trapped in the amber. Feet were made of lead and hands of stone. Even thoughts seemed to become mired in the soul-stabbing sultriness. After an entirety of the afternoon, the man on the horse came to town. The goblins looked up at the human towering over them with his worn mount. The man paid them no mind. Hooves clomped stolidly through the town, right up to the village well. The man barely touched the reins to bring the horse to a stop. Swinging one long leg over the horse, the man alit with the dried earth, kicking up a small puff of dust. He squatted down to stretch the ligaments and the muscles tight from a day's saddle. He stood and twisted, first to the left and then to the right. He pulled his hat off for a moment to swipe the worst of the sweat away. The man was stolen over the well and lowered the communal bucket into the depths. After hearing a faint splash, he hauled the bucket up and turned back to his horse. The steed shoved its nose into the bucket and drained it in one long draught. The man refilled the bucket and then drained half of it down his throat and dumped the remainder on his head. Excuse me, sir," Chapex the younger said from several feet behind the man. The man said without turning his face to the young goblin. Receiving no further response, Chapex the younger was at a loss. He turned to face the cluster of elder goblins watching from a distance. All but his grandfather urged him to continue. Old Chapex stood still and waited to see what his grandson would decide. The young goblin turned his back to the human. Are you the one they call the Spearman?" Chapex the younger asked. The human was pulling the saddlebags off his horse when he answered, Yeah, be called that, he said. Pausing for a moment, he continued, That and many other things. Chapex the younger turned back to the elders and nodded. All but the grandfather turned away and started pacing. To the human, Chapex the younger said, We've heard, stories about you and, about what you do. And what do I do? The spearman asked. That you destroy cities, Chapex the younger said. They say that you have brought down entire civilizations. They say that you've destroyed empires. They say you bring the end of times. The spearman paused, resting his head on the worn leather of his saddle. The smell of horse sweat and man sweat choked him. No, he said, I don't destroy cities and all that other stuff. I'm a messenger. Those too prideful to hear my message often end up destroyed. I haven't killed a man, or a goblin, or a dwarf, or a saurian, or any intelligent thing in just about half of forever. Tell your village elders I need to talk to them. Tonight, here in front of the well. The sun had dipped below the horizon hours before. The last of the day's heat evaporated from the dirt and the stones and the wood of the village. A few torches burned in front of a handful of houses and shops. Even the ringing of the blacksmith's anvil had fallen silent. The village elders gathered as the spearmen had asked. Most of the village had turned out to see what the stranger would say, or do. The spearman walked out of the darkness and into the small circle of torchlight. He had cleaned himself from the road rust, and now wore a simple but clean jerkin and thin leather vest over the serviceable pants. He carried an aged and worn spear in his left hand, the head of which was nicked and all but unusable. Hear me! The spearman bellowed. There was an rush of air as dozens of goblins gasped. I serve the light wizard Emperor Arian. I come to you as his emissary. My master has cast his watchful eye over your village and wishes it to become a part of his empire. Why should we? An arrogant and anonymous voice shouted out from somewhere in the goblin throng. Fair question, the spearman said. A fair question indeed. You serve the goblin king Pakal, do you not? There was a general grumbling of assent to this question. Yes, I know he lays claim to this region, the spearman said, but he cares not for any of you. This village is poor. You are many days' ride from his lair. You do not lie amongst any trade routes. The village has no military value. He claims you as greedy children claims all the sweets. He thinks he desires you, but he truly only desires the thought of having you. And your master is different, another voice from the throng, as unknown and unknowable as the first. Yes, the spearman said. The crowd began to murmur and giggle. Hold your laughter. My master will deal with you straight. He exalts me to honesty in my tasks. I tell you now, with no trace of falsehood, this village is important to my master. Old Chapex, who was at the front of the crowd and had held his tongue throughout, spoke. Aye, your master may care for the village, but what of the people? My master cares nor for you, the spearman said. There was a rush of concerned whispers. But stay your hand but for a moment. I tell you this is a wonderful blessing. My master will protect your village with all of his considerable might, and you'll be free to live as you will. You may set whatever laws in your town as you wish, save for those which endanger the empire. You may worship as however you gods dictate. You may hold whatever festivals and feasts to which you are accustomed. And the price for such blessing? Old Chupex asked. Not as much as you fear, the spearman said. You must, of course, swear allegiance to my master and forsake the Goblin King. You must send a representative to the throne, as my master desires to know more of your ways. You must agree to export 1/10 part of your carveweed, and with 1/5 part of your glowshrooms to the throne. My master may establish a garrisoned outpost near here, and you may be asked to deliver water to them. Not 1/10 part of our caveweed? Old Chapex asked. What use could a grand wizard emperor need with such meager plant? And glowshrooms are not fit fodder for even such as your mount. Why would your master ask for such useless goods? Who knows the ways of a wizard? The spearman asked. I know only that he is ancient and he is wise. I've seen his powers, unimaginable powers, firsthand. I stand before you as a testament to that power. And how is that? Old Chapex asked. Have you much truck with men, old goblin? I've met more than a few. And how long do men live? They live for as long as their lives allow, Old Chapex said. Some are stolen from the land of the living, still in the crib, and some are filled with days beyond measure. I ask not as a trick, nor as a puzzle, the spearman said. It's not philosophy. What's the oldest man that you've met, and the oldest that you've heard of? Well, Old Chapex said, I've met one man who claimed to be over 50 summers. I do not believe I've even heard of tales of one beyond 100 summers. What of my age? How old am I? You seem to be a fit, so maybe 30 summers? Old Chapex said, wary of some trap. I tell you now that I have seen more than 680 summers, the spearman shouted. My master has granted me an unnatural life as a reward for my good and faithful service. I have traveled the face of the world in many years. I have brought my master's offer to untold cities and villages. Those that accept are welcomed into the empire with open arms. And those that don't accept, Old Chapex asked, are never heard from again, the spearman said. I swear to you my master is just and fair. He will treat you well as loyal subjects. Know that with or without your village, my master will press his attack on the Goblin King, leaving his realm either subjugated or destroyed. You here today have a choice that those later in the war will not. I pray you do not squander it. The goblins looked at each other and whispered. "You have given us much to ponder, Spearman," old Chapek said. "Will you give us time to do so?" Ooh, cell phone message. Right in the middle of a fantasy story. Perfect. "I can give you until sunset tomorrow," the Spearman said. "For at fall of dark I must report to my master." "Very well," old Chapek said. "You will have your answer by sunset." The Spearman nodded and turned back to the darkness where he secured his horse. When he was sure he was beyond the firelight, he shook his head and leaned on his spear. Debate rarely served him, but it was a matter of only one day. The following evening, as the sun just reached the horizon, Chapek the Younger walked away from the village towards the small crops of trees where the Spearman had made camp. The last few wisps of smoke curled up from the fire wherein the Spearman had cooked his meal. His horse gazed and grazed a handful of yellowing grass at the edge of the camp. "Spearman!" Chapek the Younger shouted as he approached the camp. "Spearman!" "You needn't yell so, young goblin," the Spearman said. Yeah, that would have been good timing, but maybe one day. "I did not want you to mistake me for an attacker," Chapek the Younger said. The Spearman looked down at the scrawny youth wearing threadbare clothes and carrying nothing. "That was kind of you," he said. "I assume you bring to the decision of the village." "I do, Spearman," Chapek said. "The village will not pledge to your master. They feel that a human wizard will not treat them well. The Goblin King is, well, a goblin." The Spearman sighed and stared down at the spot-stained dirt between his feet. "And what do you think, young goblin?" I think the elders are wise, and so they must be right," Chapek the Younger said. The Spearman looked up into the open face of the goblin. "Wisdom doesn't mean infallible," he said, "and it doesn't prevent your own biases and fears from interfering." "But they are my elders," Chapek said, "and I will follow them." They follow the Goblin King?" "Yes." "Very well," the Spearman said. "Would you like a bite of the tiger beast before you go?" "I should be getting back," Chapek said, "and I should contact my master." "What will he do?" "Exactly what I told you," the Spearman said. An hour later, after the sun's last rays died in the west, the Spearman sat in front of the small, pale blue jewel propped up on a rock. The inside of the jewel began to swirl with clouds. The shapes shifted and turned until they formed a face deep in the jewel. "My master," the Spearman said. "Faithful servant," the old wizard said. "How goes the mission for the cave weed?" "The villagers have said no," the Spearman said. "They are still loyal to the Goblin King." "Regrettable. Could you spare this town? They are small and weak. They are no danger to you and your mighty empire. A force of 12 men could carry off as much cave weave as you require. Yes, we may raid them, but we cannot control them. Our forces push further into the Goblin Kingdom. We'd forever be wary of this village at our back. They will give aid and comfort to those who would do us harm. They may poison our waters and disrupt our supply lines. We cannot risk such a thing. To save the lives of my soldiers, I shall destroy the village. Then I shall send a mining expedition, and we shall retrieve the cave weave ourselves." The Spearman hesitated before saying, "As you command, master." He stared at the jewel for a moment more. "Will it be quick?" "This village has done nothing to displease me. I'll make their destruction swift and as painless as I can." The Spearman saw movement from the corner of his eye and turned to see the black clouds swirling over the village. A light bolt ran across the sky. The wind howled. Dust devils spiraled away from the village. In a moment, a portal opened in the middle of the black clouds over the village. A blinding orange and red fountain of energy poured through the clouds and engulfed the village in a brief, terrible instant. The spearman jerked his head away and threw his hands over his eyes as soon as the portal began pouring forth. When the thunderous noise finally stopped, he pulled his hands down and opened his eyes. Where the village once was now stood only a deep, glassy crater. The sheer bowl in the landscape would have taken an hour to walk around on foot. Any animal falling into the crater would likely starve to death, for the sides were too slick to climb. The spearman stared. He gaped, then nodded. "So, it is done," he said. "Quick and painless," said the wizard. "You have your next mission." With that, the jewel fell silent and the cloud depths dissolved. The spearman pocketed the jewel and began readying his horse. "Maybe the next village will listen," the spearman said. His horse whinnied and he shook his head. "Sometimes they do," he said, looking back at the glassy crater as he mounted up. He said, "But only sometimes." End of story. And that, my friends, ends this clip of the live stream from the weekend. I hope that you enjoyed. As always, relevant links are down below in the description, and the rest of the videos will be released throughout the week. I hope to see you in the next stream this Saturday at 1700 GMT. And I hope that you have a fantastic one until then, and I will see you all in the next video. Cheers.